Hey, welcome back to the Bigwater Podcast. Here we are again. Another week, another month, new guest. Going back far in the archives here for an interesting one. Many of you guys, maybe newer in the game, especially, might not know our guest, Sam Anderson. He was a young gun, much like myself, even many years before me. So he's got some interesting stories and perspectives from what I would say is some of the early days of tournament walleye fishing and also where a lot of that development stuff came. So who knows where this one is going to go? But we're going to bring in my longtime friend and reconnect here, Sam Anderson. Sam, there you are.
Hey Ross, how you doing? Good to see ya.
It has been a while. I don't
It, it has been a
elef-
while.
the elephant in the room is you used to be the young gun in walleye fishing. Then I was kind of that a little bit, and now I'm the old guy, so I'm not sure what that makes you.
The really old guy.
Yeah, the really old guy, but losing hair. We're wearing hats for different reasons now and all that good stuff. But it's good to reconnect there. I know me and you have touched base, not probably enough through the years, but we were talking about trying to sneak out and do some fishing on Erie and weren't
Yeah,
able to make that happen enough. But
right.
for a lot of the guys, I think that I hear the term all the time, and I'm interested to get your perspective on this. But guys that win one or two tournaments, and again, I'm not picking on age or anything, but guys in their 20s, they're like, "Oh, that guy's a legend," and I'm like, "No, Al Linder's a legend, Gary Roach is a legend, right?" Like you
Right.
have to do this stuff for a while, and you've been out of the game, and so we're going to kind of reintroduce you a little bit,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
give us a little behind the scenes for those guys that maybe aren't, in their 40s or something like that. And
Right.
because again, we won't get ahead of ourselves talking about how your life changed a little bit. But back in the early days of walleye fishing, you guys that are listening to this, Sam was one of the young guns, the guys that actually was coming out of school that was like, "Hey, I'm going to make this a job." And without digging any more into it, because you're going to tell your story a lot better than me, give everybody here a little heads up on Sam Anderson, the early years, and kind of how we got to maybe here in the long run.
Well, thanks for that, Ross. The early years, it feels and seems like it was just yesterday. I can remember my dad and a couple of other dads that would take us to Canada when we were just 5, 6 years old. The main thing was my dad said, before you can go on the trip with the guys, you got to be able to tie your own jig on because we lost a lot of jigs when we went up to Canada. And
Fair
so
enough.
that was one of the first things I figured out how to do as a young kid is tie the old Palomar knot, and then we were off. So that was really kind of my first introduction to fishing. And then as I grew up, I spent a lot of time with my dad. He would take me up open water fishing on Mille Lacs. We do some ice fishing in the winter, and then my dad and some of his buddies would fish some of the local tournaments, much like a lot of guys in every other hot walleye market in the country. And there's probably 20 or 30 of those different types of markets, right, with the different states. But the big one came to town, what I would call the inaugural, like true, uh, just slightly before it turned to pro-am. It was the 1989 in Fisherman Cabela's pro tournament. That was
That
held
was
at Mille Lacs.
pro, right?
It was pro. Yes,
Sharing a
yes,
boat. Can you imagine nowadays? Can you can you even imagine?
that was
Oh,
crazy.
yeah.
So I
Hmm.
can remember walking around the docks of Izades, looking down at Gary Roach's boat and Bob Propp Sr.'s boat. Bob had a sunflower in a pot sitting in the bottom of his boat, and he was tying up his good old bottom bouncer with a plain hook, ready to go out on the lake and put that into action.
So, for some guys, a funny side story that I know you'll have some insight on. I can remember Ron Linder saying, "Bob, there will be no pontoon boats in the PWT," and just like he's dipping his jig in gasoline just to show when the whole power bait thing was coming on, and he's like, "Oh no, no, that doesn't matter." Just he was a pioneer, but also kind of a rogue man, if you will, right?
For sure, for sure. No, I learned a lot. There's a lot of those people that I learned from, growing up. When the In Fisherman magazine was out, and I tried to get every copy of that I could, and then eventually they came out with the Walleye Insider first as a newspaper, and then eventually as the Walleye Insider magazine, and just anything. I was a little sponge growing up. When I first started guiding, it was kind of an accident. My dad took me up on Mille Lacs. We'd stay in our little 9x14 fish house over the weekend. And then he would leave me up there by myself under the supervision of the resort owner. It was actually Agate Bay on the east side of Lake Mille Lacs. And my dad would leave his boat in the water. And I was 12 years old when I first started doing that. I can't imagine having allowed my boys to do that today in today's world. But back then there was just a lot less to get in trouble with. So I was up there just going out fishing. And one day the resort owner, John Chinchilla, who no longer owns the resort, he sold that a few years ago, but he came up to me one night. I'm sitting there having a pizza at the table in the restaurant, and he's like, "Hey, there's a couple of guys that have been here for 3 days. They haven't caught a fish. Would you take them out in the morning?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I get down to the boat about 6 o'clock, and these two guys come walking down about 6:30, and I said, "Hey guys," they're like, "Hey, we're just waiting for our guide to show up." And I said, "Well, did you talk to John?" And they're like, "Yep." I said, "Well, I'm your guide, I guess." So we went out and we just were doing some simple bobber fishing and covering some of these little rock piles that were scattered on the east side. We went out for about 4 hours, and they both caught their limits, and were happy as all get out. And we went in, and that was kind of the first trip. And so
Was that
from
the
there, it
first
just
and
took
last
off.
guiding trip, or?
No, it was one of those guys actually ended up reaching back out about a month later, and he said, "I'd love to hire you. I'd like to take some clients out." And so I said, "Okay, let's book a couple days and see how it goes." And so I ended up doing five more guide trips for him that year, and then the next year he booked 15 guide trips before the season even opened.
Two.
And so I started living up there, uh, like in the summers for 2-3 weeks at a time, and just staying in our fish house, and it was great. I loved it. It was awesome.
You know, a funny thing, we had Larry Dahlberg on here, and he's
Okay,
just obviously a plethora of knowledge, but he's also a little bit of a salty son of a gun too, right? And
sure.
he started talking about exactly that because he grew up not too far from you as well. And guys, I don't think Sam mentioned it, but he grew up just north of the Twin Cities there, right? Apple Valley.
Yep.
And Dahlberg, I don't think was too far from that even. And he talked about the same thing. Some execs come out from 3M, I think it was. You guys will have to check out that podcast so I don't misspeak. But it was kind of the
Right.
same thing. They're like, "Who?" These guys are like big wigs with 3M, and they're like, "Huh?" And after he basically outfished a bunch of the other guys on this big outing, then all of a sudden, exactly what you said, he had some bigwig that said, "Hey, I want this guy for like 20 days." And I think they were doing some fly fishing and stuff like that. And he was talking about climbing up in trees. So I won't get too into the weeds on that because this is Sam's day, but you guys check that out because it was kind of a similar situation. So good company keeping there, I guess.
Yeah. No, Larry's a wise old fire. Just fiery and lots of great stories, and he's got some great saltwater stuff too that he's done over the years that I've always admired. So. Um, Yeah, so really, I think that moment from when I saw that first PWT tournament on Mille Lacs and all the boats and the competition, and Steve Fellagy won that tournament, and the local guy, and it got me super excited. They announced that they were going to do like a 4 tournament series the next year, and my dad ended up fishing one of those, and it was just really inspiring. I think at an age where I was still a sponge taking things in. And I just had a goal. I just wanted to learn as much as I could. And I thought, traveling around with my dad and eventually some other guys that we met when we first started doing it was just that great opportunity to just go out and learn a ton about different bodies of water, different techniques, different ways to fish. And, there's one thing that it has been a constant over the years is it's always changing. There's always new, you think after 20 years or 30 years, you had done it all, but it never stops changing, and that's the one thing that's pretty exciting about fishing.
I don't think anybody can ever master. We had Joe Okada on here, and he literally several times actually, but he says no one can master fishing. If people think golf can't be mastered, fishing's even because there's between the fish and the elements and just like you said, ever changing fishing. Look at
Right,
just again getting way ahead of the cart there, but forward facing fish are already adapting to that, like they're proving this already, you know, and a lot of
sure,
people still they don't even know what it is. Just when we post on social media and stuff, people are like, what is that witchcraft, you know? To
right,
even think that some anglers don't know what that is, whether they use it or not, is kind of crazy to me. But if you're not hardcore into it and you're just more probably fun fishing, it's a
right.
different deal. But so some of those early PWT things, I think it's probably like again, I went to Ohio State. I knew real fast that I wasn't going to play football at Ohio State. You went to Minnesota, right?
I went to Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay, sorry, but we beat you guys anyhow. But
Yep,
regardless, you know, any of those Big Ten schools, you probably, no offense, weren't going to play football or basketball for there.
right.
And if you did, you weren't going to be doing it when you're in your 50s anyhow.
Yeah,
And can you imagine now? You think about like your boys, if they had, you know, like college fishing, you know, if you would have been in there, or maybe what that would have done for your
right.
career, craziness.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's been just a boon to the getting young people into the sport, giving them that ability to go see these bodies of water. Like I did when I was in college, I traveled around and did the tours. It was actually a perfect complement to being in school because other than having to miss some classes in April and September, it's usually the kickoff. Usually there was an early season tournament somewhere out west on one of the reservoirs, or out east on Erie, or somewhere where the fishing got started pretty early. And then there were usually always the championships and things that were either in September or October. But yeah, the tournament fishing at the high school and the college levels today are really something.
You know, even if nothing else, like when I was at Ohio State, I think there was like 55,000 students. And just even from a social standpoint, even if you aren't trying to compete, you know, just being around other guys that are outdoorsmen
Right.
is kind of a nice thing. But well, getting back to, so you obviously we had pro. You're watching this from afar a little bit. Your dad's dipping his toes in. Kind of take me from there.
Yeah. So I had gotten so I was using my dad's boat for my guiding, and then eventually I talked to the owner, Tom Latour of Warrior Boats, and he worked out a deal where I could, buy my own boat. And so my dad helped me with that, co-signed for the loan, took out a loan, and I got that when I was 16, and that allowed me to travel. So I was doing the guiding, but um, really it was the first year I traveled on the tour. I wasn't old enough, so I was 17, and I was pulling my Warrior boat around at the tour and doing a little practice fishing for my dad and some of the other guys that we had met early on. And the nice thing about that was, while the tournament was going on, I actually took all of the camera guys out from in fishermen, and so I would get to go and essentially learn about where these guys were fishing, and what the camera people and what the people behind the scenes were doing to really write, call them scripts of sorts, what they wanted to outline for the TV show. And so you learn a lot about the behind the scenes that most people never get to see that. But because I couldn't fish the tournament, it was just a perfect opportunity. So um, I then the next year, when I turned 18, uh, went and traveled and did the tour, and didn't make the championship that first
So
year, but
did you fish as a pro your first year when you were 18?
I did. Yes, that was the first year. So I can remember it was like March, and they hadn't made the decision yet if it was going to be pro am. And then it came out like right during the Minneapolis Sports Show that, and I had been like ready. I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I can do this pro, and I don't mind taking my boat out and having someone fish with me, but hey, I might be able to get to jump in the boat with Gary Roach or Gary Parsons or some of these guys that I'd really looked up to and followed and read a lot about. And then all of a sudden that it was going to be pro am, I was just like, oh, wow, okay. That was, for a couple of months, that was a big deal, but I was like, hey, I'm committed. I'm going to do this. And just really with the idea that I wanted to learn. I wanted to try to go out, and I've always been a competitor. So go out and compete and just
Well,
let the chips fall where they may.
dude, that's brass balls right there. I mean, because even at 18 to not even go as a co-angler, like, no, we're both feet in. But
Yeah.
that's to your personality too, right? I mean, that's just, I don't know. Nowadays, I don't know if people are just maybe a little more timid now. Is that fair?
Yeah, there's a few timid ones out there, but there's still some people who are really really competitive, and it's fun. Like now what I do in the trucking logistics space, we've got young people that come into the organization all the time, and you can just see they've got that fire, and maybe they don't have a lot of experience, so they don't have a lot of battle scars, but the anxious and excitement that they have about starting this new field, and it reminds me a lot about when I first started in the fishing industry.
Early in my career, I had a lot of people say to me, like Bruce Sampson was one of them. He's like, "You're going to do good things. I don't know if it'll be in fishing or not." And as a young kid, you're like, "What? What are we?" But then I think that people, again, as you're in a more mentor role or boss role, like you can just kind of see those character traits, even if somebody's rough, that
Right,
that they have. You can train certain things, and a lot of those key characteristics, let's just say, are something that maybe you can't learn. You have to kind of
right,
have, whether it's
right.
fire or work ethic or things like that, which again, sidetrack. Maybe we're
Yeah.
we're lacking some of those things generally speaking in today's world, but I would imagine it's much harder for you to get new healthy talent, if you will, for your day job now with the trucking company that it maybe was 20 years ago. Is that fair?
I would say actually, so our industry has gone through a freight recession the last 3 years. So we went through what everybody remembers as the COVID boom, and everybody was living at home and not going into work very much, and working from home and buying stuff for their house and in cabin, second home, whatever it might be, and so that was the demand for trucking was really high, and it brought a lot of people into the industry because the rates went up. And then as the consumer shifted their buying patterns more to buying services, going on trips,
Sure.
staying in hotels, flying on planes, those things don't move in a truck. And so we've had 3 years where there's just been more capacity than there has been products that are moving around in trucks. And so that's made it a little bit more difficult. You've seen a lot of companies go out of business. You've seen a lot of companies have to downsize, and we've continued to hang in there and grow through most of it, and just recently have trimmed the size of our business a little bit. So normally in trucking, one of our most valuable resources, of course, is our drivers, and we respect our drivers, and they just make so much sacrifice out on the road. But there's been more drivers available than there are truck driving jobs today, and that's
Really?
never really happened before. So it's quite interesting.
No kidding.
So the pendulum will swing again. It always does. This is a cyclical business.
Yep.
Usually, what happens is companies go out of business, and shippers will bring down rates low enough to where only the strong can survive. But they weed out a lot of the weak, and then the demand goes up for something. Sometimes it's unpredictable. You might remember Hurricane Katrina.
Oh,
That was a period of time where it was just crazy demand, and they couldn't get enough trucks down in that area to move products in and out. And times like that will come again. So we just hang in there and fight the good fight.
well, I certainly don't know trucking. I have a few clients that own companies and things, and obviously knowing you, but we try to not talk about we talk about fishing, get you away from that when we're in the boat. But I do
Yeah.
know fishing stuff, and it's always I knew you were young. I didn't know you had just turned 18. So do you think in a certain element, because you look at like today, I would say, and that's why again, it's like I always say like bell bottoms, kids think that they're wearing bell bottoms now and they don't know that their grandma was wearing them and getting all
Right.
crazy, 60 years ago or whatever it is. But nowadays on the Bassmaster Elite Series as an example,
Right.
you're seeing some young dudes that
Yeah.
are smoking guys that
Yes.
have way more knowledge, because of the technology.
Yep.
And again, I don't even like having the conversation. I think it's so even myself, like I don't even know where I feel about it, to be honest, because again, when somebody comes in, doesn't know anything, they play a video game, again, talking about forward facing sonar, I'm kind
Right.
of like, well, how does that, eliminate someone's experience and intuition and all of these things? And in a different way, when you came onto the scene, there was all, I mean, I can remember back year, I want to say, what was it, like 95 or something, where we had the first, or 96, where we went from just like a snail trail of GPS to actually having some mapping. And I may be a
Yep.
little bit off there, but
Yeah.
again, you could make that argument then, that when
Right.
somebody was lining up trees on shore and now they have a map that I can buy at Fish USA,
For sure.
that's witchcraft in its own time.
Back in the day. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I would say it seems like forward facing sonar gets a lot of hype from various people's opinions and things today, more than what I would remember from just GPS mapping back then. And I think it's hard to stop technology. Technology is gonna, no matter where you stand on the issue. I've just, I've only been using it for the last couple of years, so I would call myself still, relatively new at using it in a very refined way. But I will tell you, it does allow you to, think about fishing in a different light, and you still have to do a lot of other things to make sure that you catch those fish. And you still have to do a lot of things like when you catch those fish to be responsible. So, um, you know, I don't have like a big opinion on where are we going with this
yeah,
in
we're,
five
we're not
years.
going down that road. We've already been down that road too many times. But I guess
Yeah,
my only thing that I'll throw in there, because I can, is it is different, to your point, than mapping, because with the mapping, it made a good fisherman better.
right.
I would argue that forward facing stuff, it can take someone that's not a good fisherman and make them able to compete.
Hmm.
That's a whole nother thing, but we're not going to
Yeah,
go down that. We're not
yeah,
going down that road.
yeah.
But anyhow, back to, so these early years, and I always wondered, because I used to travel, the guys that maybe have listened to this, and I know but I traveled with Gary Roach for a number of years when I was in college and doing that stuff. And yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, human sponge. Like,
right.
I never stopped talking, but with Gary, you just listen, you just
Sure.
observe, you know what I mean, and just soak all of that stuff up. And um, I was it kind of the same thing for you when the new guy came in with some of the old guys? Like, how receptive were they, or were some of your dad maybe help be honest, because he maybe had some of those guys that you could be around, that they just wouldn't be like, oh, here's that young kid, yeah, right,
Well, when I can still remember the first time I fished Lake Erie, and we were out there. I think it was '93, and we go out to Put in Bay. Take the ferry across, put our trucks and rigs on the ferry, and we're staying at I forget, the Lakeside Motel or something like that.
so I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. How big of a boat and motor did you have then, to put this in perspective?
Yeah, it was a 17-foot tiller with a 75 horse Mariner on it.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, just crazy to think about that. And then the guy next to us, his name was Mark Broombaugh. And
Boom boom.
yeah, Mark was there. He had his overalls on, farmer who loved to fish. And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. Mark and I still stay in touch today. Um, Learned an incredible amount from Mark, and just the nicest guy you'll ever meet, and caring. And we went to each other's weddings over the years, and just enjoyed reminiscing about all the days that we've had. Not just on the tournament circuit, but you spend a lot of time together at sports shows and just other industry types of events. Helping sponsors market their products, develop products. Um, that was Mark. Mark for sure is one of the best friends that I've made over the years. But there's been so many people that helped me early on learning about fishing. Then there's been some others that helped me get started with the business side, of fishing. And I would say Gary Parsons was one of those people who shared more than he had to, told me some things, taught me some things on things to look for, ways to approach sponsors, that combined with my marketing degree from the University of Wisconsin was kind of a lethal combination back then. There weren't that many fishermen that really approached sponsors from a true business perspective. They basically wanted to get paid to do tournaments, and there's really not a lot of benefit in that to a manufacturer. When you really approach them and understand what they're trying to get out of a relationship, whether that be through developing products that really do matter and make a difference in people's lives, or helping them with how to communicate and reach their ultimate consumer in ways that are going to impact sales, or even just in direct selling. There are a lot of different ways to approach it, but very thankful that I had kind of that early guidance from people like Gary, and then was able to just take it and run with it.
I mean, honestly, Sam, 30 years later, yes, there are still people that are taking a business-like approach, but there's a lot of these guys that are really good fishermen that don't have the business, and then there's some business guys that they just don't really have the, I don't know, I think they try skipping over it, where they're like, I'm a business guy, so I'm going to just like sell fish and stuff, but they don't maybe have that credibility. You can almost have to just have a good balance of the both. And I think that on the bass side, I always use them as an example because it's just such a bigger market and you can kind of see it, I think, easier. But guys like a Kevin Van Dam or something, I
Right.
tell people all the time, I'm like, he's one of the best business guys, whether it's his wife helping or when we're at events, because we share some mutual partners, and he's the first guy there and the last one to leave. And, probably if anybody for many years that didn't have to do that, it probably would have been him.
Right.
And I think that the business, your younger guys that are always listening to these things, is like 100% the business. The people have to sell stuff. I mean, ultimately, you win every tournament. It doesn't matter if they're not selling stuff. You got to fill trucks and haul stuff. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? It's just you got to turn and burn. And I think that people get caught up with that. And I say it all the time, and different people, when they ask me now, because I'm kind of in that mentor, role for some people, and
Yeah.
they always forget they're just fish, 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 and you got to be good at it. But
Right.
it's funny that, and I think the guys that have stuck around, they understood that, and I think that's just a generation thing too. I mean, back then, do you remember Scott Fairbairn, the first guy to
Yeah.
have the wrapped boat?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that,
I remember Scott. He was always a fierce competitor, and just a nice guy, and um, you know, had a way with being able to talk to sponsors in the language that mattered to those sponsors.
and do you know, funny, so crazy story, because I used to do my Mark Martin impression for him all the time and make him laugh. Yeah, we'll save that one for another podcast. But
Okay.
and he went back to school, and I think he was working for 3M or something.
Yeah.
And do you know what he's doing now?
No.
I only knew because he came up and grabbed me from behind and was like, "Hey, old man," and I'm like, "He works for Johnson Outdoors, Humminbird Minn Kota,
Oh,
Canton."
wow. Oh, good
Yeah,
for him.
he's a big shooter for them now. So things kind of definitely came full circle, which
Wow.
which is great. I love to see that, because there's a guy there that's not just straight looking at numbers, but understands what the numbers are. Some of
Hmm.
these giant corporations, and I mean, you name off a bunch of them right now that are getting broke up and bought out, and things not going well because just strictly bean counters, that don't understand. Just like you kind of said, it's like you have to understand your drivers. It's not just a number or a person, but
Right.
understanding that it ends up making a big difference, because everybody's got the same truck and everybody's got the same numbers they're trying to get, right? It's those little things
Right.
that make a big difference. But
Yeah,
so in the
it was
sorry,
fun. I think as I got a little bit past the first couple of years in the touring on the trail, and you start to build that credibility, that hey, you are knowledgeable about fishing, and then you start getting these opportunities to speak at the different sport shows, or you've got owners or presidents of companies asking you to come in and talk to them about, the things that either how you've had success, or how I might be able to help them with success in their products. You learn a lot, and I think that business side was probably as exciting, or maybe even more exciting to me than the fishing at times. I love to travel, and I love to compete, and I love to learn new things with fishing. Um, and at the same time, I also love the business side.
I like
And
seeing how things worked myself. I don't know. That's probably our
yeah, it
nature.
was. I ended up helping one of my sponsors. I don't know if you remember Drift Control, the sea anchors.
Well, I
But
remember. I remember what the end result. Well, let's not go there quite yet. But
yeah, yeah. I bought the company from them, and um, we were able to, grow that into a nice little business. And then we did it again with Beckman Nets, and continue to help those companies, with their marketing plans, and their getting their order entry, and all of the process related things to help their businesses do better financially. And then eventually, got to sell that to Lindy Little Joe and become one of the owners of Lindy Little Joe.
so backing
So
up a little bit, because you're like a racehorse here. What year? Because I work with Beckman now, which is just
okay,
crazy. And
okay,
I had a buddy by the name of Sam who sent me some Beckman nets. When was that?
that would have probably been like 98, 99, 2000.
So you talk about the quality of those. I'm still using those nets now. I've put quite a few bags on them, but I
Right.
still have those original ones. And then I actually inherited Jim Foffrich's Beckman from way prior to you. So
Wow,
yeah,
that's
they just
cool.
they just unless you run them over or something, you're pretty good.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I mean they were bulletproof. The construction of those nets was second to none, and it's been a brand with a great name recognition.
So we kind of jumped over too. I feel with obligated to ask you if you took some hard lumps, because those first couple of years, I don't care if you're Dale Jr. and Earnhardt's your dad and you're racing, like there's going to be some lumps in there. What were some of the just like moments? I mean, there had to be. I mean, because in fishing, like we had Brandon Palaniuk on the podcast actually right before he won the Angler of the Year, and
Okay.
one of his comments or his quotes slightly off, but basically the premise of it was this sport, even the most winning guy loses more than almost any other sport,
Right.
right? I mean, a
Right.
guy that has 10 or 12 wins in his entire career is like a legend, and
Right.
that's a lot of losing. That's a
Yeah.
lot of losing.
Yeah. I would say, one of the guys that taught me, Mike Gofron, was another dear friend, and someone who Mike was always one of the most consistent people out there. And I learned from him that you first got to figure out how to go out and have two or three different ways to catch a limit every single day of the tournament. They don't have to be the biggest fish, but just weigh a limit every single day, every tournament, and you're going to be in the top 6, 7, 8, top 10 for Angler of the Year. And by that was my third year is when I first qualified for the championship. So those first 2 years were tough. I missed the championship by uh, like 15, 16 spots in year one, and I think it was like 7 spots year two, and finally making it that third year was a big accomplishment. And um, but you got to be willing to take setbacks. You're gonna go into a tournament where you got a great game plan until you don't. And I think adapting is huge. Figuring out how to adapt through whatever it might be. It's not just weather; it's all kinds of different things. But and then over the years, you get put into pressure situations. My fourth year, I was neck and neck with Ron Seelaw for Angler of the Year, and ended up, second. Losing out to Ron by a couple of pounds. He he was behind me going into the last tournament, and then he won the last tournament and
Tough break,
leapfrogged
kid.
me. And, was out on the Missouri River where I was still trying to figure out how to, fish reservoirs better, and that was a hard lesson and I finished the top 10 in that one, but it's just those are the lumps you have to take. It's like, okay, he was trolling before the trolling thing really, really started to take off over that next 4 or 5 years. And he was pioneering things. He was doing things that nobody else was doing.
So
So he deserved it.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, let's see if my history is good. Did you get beat by a number 5 Shad Rap in Lidcore?
Not in that tournament.
What was it? What was the mojo for Ron then?
So he was using Shad Raps, but he was using big Shad Raps, number 8s and number 9s.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I remember just seeing boxes, and I think it was like in Fisherman or Walleye Insider, where he just, like those smaller Shad Raps, he just seemed to just have millions of those things hanging up in trees or whatever it was. But that was his deal.
I was just with Bart Rosen here a couple weeks ago, and Bart works for Rapala. And Bart and I are dear friends. Bart and I have known each other. It was his dad and my dad that took us to Canada back when we were 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. So we've been lifelong friends. And we were talking about the number 5 Shad Rap. The number 5 Shad Rap, in my opinion, is undoubtedly still the best walleye crankbait on the planet. And even though they've got dozens of different colors today, I love the shad. Just the natural shad, number 5 Shad Rap. That thing is just gold. It's been a lot of tournaments won on that thing.
On your account, I'm going to call it your home link there, Mille Lacs. Didn't they used to rent those when they first came out? They wouldn't sell them. And they had like
I don't remember that.
Do you remember that?
I don't. No.
That's an old like is either Al or Roach commercial. They would rent them out. I just read it through. I want to say it was in Fisherman just had something. They would rent them for like getting baits were much less money then, but they had like a $20 deposit. You couldn't buy them.
Wow.
You had to, yeah. But a little bit of maybe that was a little marketing involved there too. So
could be. Yeah, could be.
But so in those early years, I mean, I think what we were doing, and indirectly, and the thing I didn't even know it at the time, because again, I watched you on TV, right? And all of a sudden, so you're spurring a generation just like we're doing now for the next, garden tournaments and all that stuff. I don't, do we really at the time, or did you understand, like, I don't want to say how genius the Linders were with building a marketing company for walleyes, but they really built up everything that we have nowadays, right? Like they were the proactive FLW or whatever you want to call it ahead of time, that they understood, like you said earlier, that we've got to sell stuff here. Like we can't just have this be a bar league ego tournament. Like we've got to use this as a platform properly.
Yeah. They were, so I think it started out much like a lot of us, where they were the pioneers, no doubt, in their day. And the media and the access to information back in their day was really challenging. Basically the way you transferred information about fishing was being at the local fishing shop, at the bait dealer, or the diner, or the coffee shop, or whatever it was back then. And so when they first started, a lot of their stuff was done really on the road, giving seminars to small fishing clubs. And then they eventually started their magazine. And I think the magazine probably struggled for the first 10 or 15 years. But they were at that point, that precipice between when the media business and the consumer demand for information took off. And so they were there to capitalize on it, but it didn't come easy. I know that they worked their tails off, and it was because they loved it. It was passionate.
I think that's what you have to have. We had Al on here, and he was brutally honest with, he said, people came in and said, like, the bank and stuff, and said, hey guys, this is about a wrap. And then ironically, in some of the, probably about the time you were starting to come around there and make that a deal, then all of a sudden things started clicking a little bit. But there were some Well, it's just anything. I'm sure if, when your dad started Bay and Bay or when that early years of that, I mean, I'm sure there was awful lot of days where things weren't amazing, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. You go through ups and downs, no doubt.
Hmm. I would argue, I think the craziest thing again to me is I don't think that like those we always look at things again. You can remember whether it's relationships or jobs or whatever it is from 20 years ago, be like, man, was that good? And it's like, no, if you really remembered it, it wasn't as good as you think it was, right? But I feel like almost nowadays the media is not as good. When you look at like things that we're just really dragging, I'm not trying to drag on individuals or I'm not gonna name names on things, but when
Right,
you look at like we haven't come that far with the media. I mean, it's crazy to me. Back then they had, like you said, print. We had in Fisherman had a radio show. We really don't even have a what I would call an industry podcast. You know,
right,
um, that is like that's the one.
right.
There's not the things that like where do you go to, and I think the problem with that is and again, I love to hear your take is an insider but an outsider at the same time.
Yeah,
Is you think about like your boys as an example. If they said, "Hey, I want to do this, Dad," where would you even send them right now? Because this is the analogy I use. So then I'll let you run with this. When I want to like fix something in a house, like I found out the dogs on my dish or my laundry machine. I didn't even know what they were called, but they're about $4 part. Keeps you from buying a new machine, right? And you can change those out. It's not that big of a deal. Well, I watched 400 videos to get to the point where somebody there was I don't know how many videos I watched on fixing a washer where it literally said, "Well, I guess I didn't know how to figure it out. I'm going to try it next week." And I'm like, "Oh my god, I just watched 10 minutes of this guy dragging this out." And where I'm going with that is there are so many outlets and so much information out there, but the problem is a lot of it isn't qualified, right?
right.
There's a lot of bullhorns and just a lot of stuff out there. So again, like I just think about it, if your boys wanted to go look at things, I don't know what would you even tell them. I mean, there's so much out there, and so much of it is hogwash.
Yeah, obviously media's changed a lot with social media, whatever the last 10, 12, 15 years, in the consumption of information. Like people want to consume lots of information. They want to consume, multiple forms of media at once. I see, some of the kids in high school today are, they're on multiple devices, and yeah, it's just different the way information's being consumed. Which again, they would be much better to tell me, like, if you were going to try to sell something, if you're speaking in those languages, like how do you help a sponsor reach their target audience? With the distribution in social media, it's just such a different game, and everything is like condensed down. So like we might spend 30 minutes or an hour going through and trying to find information, and they won't spend more than 5 minutes. Like it's just rapid
Well,
fire, bam, bam, bam.
and that's kind of where I'm going with it. I just had a thing here just before we started. I was clearing out notifications. I was out guiding early this morning and it was nasty and raining. And so I had my phone tucked away there. And it was like a thing came up on Facebook and they're like, your videos of less than 10 seconds have a 3,500% more reach, or, and again, what can I do in 10-second video? It's a TikTok, it's a being goofy, it's a release of
Yep.
a fish, and that's not selling anything. And
Right.
yet we'll put a video together that basically probably some of the people even around me were like, why don't give all of that away?
Right.
What do you don't? And it's key information, but again, that's not stuff that does well. And all of a sudden, now, well, we don't want more of that because, and again, the companies that even come to me and they're like, well, they just like business, right? They they praise us for getting numbers, but to me, it's kind of like just like you said with the people in your business, it's a number isn't a number. I may get a million views, which we just had a million views on one of our videos. It didn't
Wow.
sell anything. It didn't, you know what
Right.
I mean? It was just one of those clips that was kind of funny.
Yeah. Took
And
off.
again, maybe that brings some reach in or whatever, but I think sometimes these numbers are ill calculated. How about
Mhm.
that? I
Yeah.
don't.
Maybe calculating the wrong things.
Yeah. But then again, everybody's going for reach and stuff, and you see even kids again outside of fishing and going off on a tangent. But I'm sure even like your kids' age, they're maybe getting a little older that they're kind of out of that slightly. But people doing things just to get attention or reach, even though
Right.
if it's not fishing, who knows what it is? I mean, people being silly might be a nice way of saying it, um, but it's just different. And again, that's why I've wondered your perspective, being such a business guy, because we've had some really good fishermen on here, and
Yeah.
I would say again, just like you said, very few of these guys are the businessman that most of the companies they work with or the industry
Hmm.
would want more. How about that?
Yeah, it really is interesting to kind of watch, and I've stayed in touch with Mark and some of the other guys, and I think as I started to, I think I took a kind of a break from the tournament fishing late 2000s, and then my dad passed away, and it sounds like the being able to work with the companies in the industry, a lot of the consolidation was taking place, and people are going through tough times during the Great Recession, 08, 09, 10. So that had an impact on people. And I just think now we're in this more digitized age. I feel like when I'm watching some of these, especially on the Bass Tour, some of these young guys, just like what they're doing to win, is it's exciting. It's really cool to see those. They're motivated, and uh, they're looking at things through a different lens, and I think that's really a good thing. Like they're coming out with new things that are revolutionizing, the ways people, and it's not any. Sometimes it's they're redoing something, making something old new again. You're talking
The
about
bell
bell
bottom.
bottoms.
Yeah.
So there's certainly some of that, but there's other things, where some of the plastics that they're designing nowadays that feel they're so soft. I compare them to whatever a Mr. Twister from 30 years ago, and the Mr. Twister was a pretty good lure, but it has nothing on the rubber plastics and baits of today with the lifelike feel.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, because the plastics that you used as a kid, I imagine if you showed them to your kids and they'd be like, "You use this on purpose?"
Right,
Like
right,
like how? What? And
yeah,
again, it's shifting things a little bit away from the live bait stuff, right? Like I don't think that, I mean, I was pulling night crawlers today on spinner rigs, maybe that's
right,
me hanging on, but I still know in some of that nicer, cleaner water we have, if you use the plastics that are still currently available, you're going to get outfished heavily by live night crawlers.
right,
But it
right.
just reality. I know some of the places out west and things like that, for people listening, I know that when you're in that more off colored water, not the clean water of the Great Lakes, yes, you can catch them almost as good or maybe better on a slow death or something. But that
Right.
clean water of the Great Lakes, there's, and same thing with leeches up in your neck of the woods at
Yeah.
times.
Yep.
But
Yep. They're hard to beat.
so backing up a little bit, so give us a little insight, because you just don't buy drift control. Like, so give us
Hmm.
a little insight to the behind the scenes of how some of those couple purchases went down, and maybe what the plan was. Because again, you younger guys that are listening to this, or maybe even the older guys, or if anybody that's thinking about business and fishing, because I get these things all the time, messages almost daily, if not weekly for sure. um, and people are like, well, how do I get into this? And it sounded like 30 years ago you were making a real master plan into making it not just tournament fishing. So give us the behind the scenes.
Yeah. It really, I mean, that situation happened through just some good, honest, straightforward helping them out, and helping them grow their business beyond what they were able to do on their own. And I happened to bring some marketing and some sales stuff, some pretty basic stuff to the business. And one of the owners, it was two brothers. One of the owners was just ready. He had been more the financier, and so that was really my first foray into taking on some debt and uh, giving it a shot. And then you start to learn the finance side of the business. And really, in any business, you have to really understand, basic accounting principles, how you build a relationship with a bank or lenders, what certain ratios that if you're going to take on debt, there's certain KPIs, measurements of sorts that partners like that look for. And so as you're running a business, one, you need to, be profitable. But if you want to grow and you're a levered business, then there's a different set of metrics that banks or lenders will look at. And so, that was kind of early on. These companies weren't all that big, so it wasn't, it wasn't. It was kind of trial and error. Thankfully, we had some good products that had some good margins. It's one thing to be in a good margin business. You don't have to sell a lot to be able to make a profit. But we didn't get ahead of ourselves either. Like we were realistic on what we could come out with each year for new products. We didn't want to just create a bunch of stuff that you could sell one time and create this reputation with the retailers that all you're doing is getting the pipeline fill, and then a year later we're talking about 50% of the product that we didn't sell, and what are we going to do with that? And you learn about merchandising. So it's just a lot of basic business things that you read about in school, but until you really do it and start applying it and seeing what works and what doesn't, that's how you get experience. And we made a lot of mistakes. We came out with some products that weren't as great as we thought they were. And maybe it was that we didn't market them properly, or maybe we didn't get them in the hands of the people that really could use them. But then we had some huge success stories. And each time we did that, each year was kind of a new year, a new set of opportunities and challenges, and we would just get after it. And it's like I still talk to some of the folks that are running some of these businesses, and it's the ice fishing business still is one that just that's a tough one because it's such a short season.
We had a couple tough years there.
And it's so weather dependent, and you can get your tail handed to you. And it might be you just came out with one of the best new products of the season, but there's no ice. So guess what? You're not going to sell that many.
That's a brutal deal. Is it fair to say when you were kind of talking there that you kind of have to jump in with both feet, but maybe let's go in the shallow end and not the deep end?
Yeah, well, Denver Kaufman is the name of the partner who was the financier for Drift Control. And I had to go get a loan. It was for about $180,000. But the way that deal worked was Denver said, I want to help my brother take this on to the next chapter. And Denver was in his 70s and Stuart was in his late 60s. He's like, and we're ready to retire. And so he basically sold me the company for the cost of the inventory.
Wow.
And, so that was a gift, but it was still $180,000 I had to go find. But, then we doubled the business 3 times in 3 years. So, we got it up to over $1 million in, by year 3 and doubled it again. And, got it to where it was really making a nice profit. We were able to reinvest and pay off our debt. And, that's the thing. You got to be able to make sure that you're making enough money to be able to pay your debt down.
So back then we had drift bags.
Yeah.
We had the drift harnesses. What were some of the other products that kind of allowed you to make that growth?
Well, we got into the rod socks and the rod bags.
I still have some of those you sent me. I mean,
Yeah.
not some. I have actually quite a few. I still use them.
Yeah, they're great. And of course, there's been dozens of different concepts and other because they are such a common, simple thing that pretty much everybody that owns a boat would use. So they were a wild success. We ended up getting into some of the ice fishing gear, so some of the bags and rod bags, and kind of an extension of those lines.
I had an auger cover I still have from you.
Yep.
That was under the Beckman.
That was under Beckman. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what we had kind of merged the two from a back office, behind the scenes, the logistics and the warehousing and supply chain and all of that stuff was, all kind of together, but still different brands.
So that was either really good quality or I'm a packer rat or both.
Yeah, no,
Literally still have all that stuff.
yeah, most of that stuff, it was, we wanted to be a quality brand. We wanted to position ourselves in the marketplace because that was also at the time, early 2000s was when all the big retailers were starting to do their own private label stuff. And so if you had a product that got to be a certain quantity, I'll just arbitrarily use a unit count of 10,000 units. If you sold less than 10,000 units in a SKU, you were kind of off the grid. They weren't really looking at that product as a product that they were going to, try to put their label on. But if you got over that, you had to make sure that you were the premium brand because they weren't going to get rid of the premium brand. They might impact your sales. You might go from, let's say you did 15,000 units a year with a combined, let's say your top 5, 6 customers, and 2 or 3 of them wanted to private label something in that lineup, you might see your sales dip by 20 or 30%. But it was usually that lower quality, the lower price point. And as long as you weren't in the low quality, low price point stuff, you were usually not impacted too bad.
I mean, you see that today with, like, I would say if you went to a big box store like a Senko, they've got $1.99 Senkos that are no names and different salt
Right,
content and all that stuff, and they probably don't catch them as good. But are you going to get the original for $8, $9 a bag or whatever they are, or a Yeti cooler or something like that? But
right, right.
interesting. So how do we? So you obviously, I mean, I'm not going to put words in your mouth here, but when you start doing the double the growth and all this stuff with the drift control, that allowed the both banks and also the comfort level and the realization that, hey, we're going to try to make this the thing. And that's when the Beckman came about. And again, timing has to be perfect, right?
Yeah, it was a similar situation. It was 2 brothers. They had a really good product, a really good brand. Their situation was different than the drift control. Um, they they didn't want to create inventory, so they didn't want to build up inventory ahead of when the normal buying season is. Typically, the retailers want to bring landing nets in sometime in January, mostly in the northern part of the U.S. Because they're going to start, advertising them and getting things ready to go. Come late February, March, April, May. That's when the shelves get cleared out. And they didn't want to like build a bunch of inventory, so they would start making nets when they would get orders in November and December. And whoever placed their orders first always got their orders fulfilled 100%. But you get a Gander Mountain back in the day, and they would give you, 30, 40, 50 POs, and you'd start building them in December. And there's no way you're getting those done because you got to order all of the raw materials. And so that we just changed the model about 8 months into me owning it. We started building in advance of orders. So we were building inventory ahead of demand. And that alone, the first full year that I owned it, we doubled the business without any extra sales. It was just because we had inventory.
That's a funny concept, right? If you don't
Yeah,
have it, you can't sell it. And there's still a lot of companies like that to this day.
right.
And then I think in the Amazon world that we live in and some of these box stores, like, you get penalized now. People listening to this probably don't know, but if you ship to a certain big box store and that you don't have, if they order 100 or something and you don't send 100 or it's not on time, you get penalized to the point you maybe don't make money on that order, or you might
Right.
not be in the catalog or now the website or whatever moving forward. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a little bit of a gamble. So did that kind of take off? Because I always wonder, I see so many people and even guys that have really nice boats and stuff. Not that that matters, but obviously it's showing someone that has outlaid some dollars there, and they got junk nets. It always just blows my mind. I don't get it.
Right.
Like, and again, I always tell people, I'm like, I still literally the two nets I have in my boat are from you 30 years ago,
Yeah.
and I don't know what that would have cost retail then. My buddy
Sure.
Sam took care of me, but
Yeah.
what that is now, and it's like the guy that bought 10 junk nets is farther behind any of the junk product while he was doing it.
100%. 100%. I think Beckman was a little bit of an enigma in terms of a product, one that there was so much quality put into the materials used in those nets, and the craftsmanship and the design, for them to last literally decades. Dads are handing down their landing nets to their sons and so on and so forth. It's a pretty rare thing, in today's society. I haven't bought a Beckman lately, and I know that they've been harder to find on the shelves. I know you can get them online, so I'm not sure if they're still using the same quality as we did way back then. But if they are, they're worth every penny, like you say. And I've got nets that are 30 plus years old, and they're still just working great.
I still carry, and they're newer ones, obviously, because you didn't have them back then. The rubber bags that they've got now.
Mhm.
I don't always use those, but I have them in the boat,
Yeah,
and I mean, I use them every day. But and so I
yeah.
would say that as much use and abuse as I put on those. Matter of fact, we just did a casting video that's coming out here, I think tomorrow or the next day. That I only
Okay,
took the rubber net because I was by myself trying to do the whole thing and slinging. And
sure.
yeah, I think they have, because I think it's like, a Maserati customer expects a Porsche or Maserati or whatever, and then the guy
Yeah,
that's the escort's the escort. It just is what it is. Um,
right.
and but again, some of those companies, though, to your point, they try to live off old names, and they maybe cut corners where they shouldn't. But
Yeah,
um, so the Beckman thing, you got some of the prime. Remember some of those ice products and some storage things, and that you ran
yep.
under that umbrella. Was the plan to, was the numbers just too good, or is this come into where kind of the life things shifted, where you just, because I would imagine that you were almost like your little equity group. You were your individual equity group before we know of that in the fishing world back then, that you probably would have purchased another company or two, or tried to build something.
Yeah, we looked at acquisitions back then, and I would just say, uh, I was splitting my time between being on tour, and then running that company. Although I did have a general manager, who was down in Madison, Wisconsin, really still doing all the management of the labor and manufacturing and the importing and the warehousing and the shipping and stuff. So he did a great job. But then I was also helping my dad. I'd done a few projects for our trucking business. And it was really in the early, 2000, 2001, where I just felt like I was starting to stretch myself. Um, I wasn't giving the tournament fishing every part of me, and the results were suffering. It wasn't that I was not as good as an angler. It was that I wasn't as focused. And looking back on that, that's probably one thing I would have done a little bit differently. Um, is maybe not tried to pursue all of the business pursuits with and it wasn't even just Beckman and drift control, but just some other things. It would have been fun to just stay on tour for a couple more years and try to win more tournaments. But you got to move on to the next chapter in life, right? And I got married in 2000. So my wife and I are celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary this year. Just amazing woman. Can't imagine doing life without her. And then we eventually go on to have two boys. And so I think there's just a lot of things going on, and I had to figure out what was going to be best for my family. And I had having grown up in it, watching so many of these guys that were super talented, over 10, 15, 20 years, like lose their job or get a divorce or lose their family, or struggle with addictions. And I didn't want to be one of those people. And so, that's when I started cutting back the tournament fishing. And, really in about 2003 is when I decided that I was going to go ahead and, sell, Beckman and drift control to Lindy and be able to step away from that and really just focus on my family. And then, really do the trucking business full time.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people, I kind of joked with you ahead of this, is most people that come on here, they like sold out their 401k. They threw it all in to go fishing. We kind of did anticlimactic the other way, but it's just another good perspective. And like you said, it's a reality where you look at in the fishing industry, more people fail. And when I say more, I mean almost everybody than are
Yeah.
what are successful. And in a different way, I see the same thing in some of my frustrations with even individual partners that I have where, we produce, well, like I have a media company. We have a guide service. I have a media company, just like we're doing right now. I mean,
Yeah.
I got up super early. We're fishing, we're beating stuff up and fixing things today, but we're sitting down with you. And I love doing this
Yeah.
aside from, rehashing. Like I said, we've had Roach on here. I snookered him on getting on here. He didn't even know what he was doing, but
Oh man.
it, Al's like, that was a good maneuver. We got the lenders on, stuff like that. And kind of trying to, catalog some of these old guys like yourself that maybe people don't know and can learn a little bit from, or some old stories like, well, I'm sure we'll finish here with. But I see the same thing, and some of my frustrations with the companies are, I'm like, you're giving the same credit to the guy that's fishing 4 tournaments or different things, and I'm like, I'm producing 400 videos, getting this many sales or impressions, and we're doing this many podcasts, and it costs a lot of it's fiscal, but it's also your time, like you said. And to
Yep.
not be able to just fish. Like there's some guys that live around me that are they're fish bums and they're really good. That's all they do, and it's a
Right.
lot easier to do that when you're not working, a lot. And I can remember even then when you were in college seeing like an in fisherman thing, because like my brain, I can't remember like breakfast or something, but I remember you doing a thing where you had a storm shirt on. This is like how crazy my memory is with some things. And
Okay.
you
Sure.
were talking about in college how you had to set so much time aside with the fishing business to
Yep.
make sure that you have that. And um there's a lot besides just casting, right? And
Right. Right.
so
Yeah. Lots of good memories. Lots of good people.
do you ever regret selling?
I don't. No.
Okay.
It was the right thing to do at the time, and kind of one door closes, another door opens. When I got involved with our trucking company, we were, um, less than $10 million in revenue a year, and um, less than 50 employees, and now we're nearly 1,000 employees and almost 500 million in revenue. So, just been very blessed along the way, where we've learned a lot of things, made a lot of mistakes, and you take advantage of the good times, and then prepare. We talk about kind of 4 stages here at the company, and through our industry, and it's really, you prepare to endure, then you endure, and we're enduring right now. That's the phase we're in. And then hopefully pretty soon, maybe by the end of, second half of this year or early first quarter next year, we'll be preparing to thrive. And hopefully a year from now, we'll be thriving.
Well, it's just funny because I can remember again. I'm probably going to get outed by some of my family and things for like, oh, he can remember things. It was, I don't know, maybe it was probably longer ago than I think. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago. You like randomly text me. Do you remember? And
Okay.
you're like, hey, I want to. What about trying to get a fishing trip together? I want to come out there, be kind of
Yeah.
impromptu, whenever. And I
Yep.
think we've done it a couple times. And I
Yep.
remember just in the truck or something and handed it to one of my buddies that's fishing buddy. And because I was just chuckling and I
Yeah.
go, things have come full circle. I'm going to maybe take Sam Anderson fishing now. Right. And, but again, obviously you're so busy with stuff. And even like when we touched base here, I don't know, a couple months ago, 3, 4 months ago,
Yeah.
whatever it was, maybe not that much even, because you were in Green Bay.
Yeah. April.
Yeah. So there you go. A couple months
Yep.
ago.
Yep.
And you were on Green Bay fishing, and I said, well, good for you, because again, when you have all this stuff going on, it's no different than anything else. It's tough to make time, right?
Right.
You got kids in college now, as crazy as that is
Yeah.
to believe, but it's just a lot of things going on. It makes it a little harder. So
You got to stop and smell the roses. That would be probably one of my biggest pieces of advice is, whether you're winning a tournament, whether you just had, some sort of, big deal in business, or some personal thing that happened that was just super incredible. You just enjoy it because it goes by quick.
but I'm probably not qualified to give anybody advice, or at least not you. I can give people advice, maybe not you. However, are you making enough time for fishing with all that you got going on?
I haven't made as much time in the
Okay, at
last
least
few years, but I'm still fishing more than most.
okay.
I love Lake of the Woods. That's the one place I'll never give up. I go up to Lake of the Woods every year. And I don't know if you remember, but the last tournament I fished was in 2012.
I'm not that
And
good.
yeah, that was the last tournament, and I won that tournament, and I said, it's time to hang it up. And I haven't
Oh,
fished a
you did.
tournament since.
You went out on a high note. How was
Yeah,
that a what was that? What series was that?
that was the tail end of God. What's I'm going to forget the name now. Um, yeah,
Got senioritis going on.
I got senioritis going on.
Not FLW, not AIM.
That was yes, it was AIM. Hold on.
You got to Google yourself, Sam. Is that
Yep,
is that where we're at right now?
yep.
Sam is Googling himself to find out when he or what he actually won. Do you remember what you did to win?
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. Um, yeah,
So was that a team deal or was that a pro-am?
that was a pro-am. So we were fishing suspended fish out in the basin, and we were trolling crankbaits, and it was I was using so we're all using one rod per person, two people in the boat, so little tricky, but it we found a few things that we were doing. We were making hard turns once we got over these big fish, and that was the catch, record, and release type tournaments.
Right.
And we got on some of these 30-inch pods of fish. And day one, I had 4 fish over 30 inches, and everything else was over 28 inches.
That's an old fish up your neck of the woods.
It is, it is.
So were
But
they biting on the fast side or the slow side?
the slow side. So
Stall.
we'd
The
make it.
old Pete Harsh stall.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yep. And we just make those quick turns, and you'd get one. You get it in the boat as quick as you can, and then turn around and go back over them, catch one or two, and if you were lucky, you'd get a third turn on them. But then the pods would break up. But they were all big, big fish, and they just wanted that bait just kind of rising.
So what was the juice? I mean, you're not tournament fishing. You can tell us, like,
It was a reef runner.
reef runner, the
Reef
big
runner.
one.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, 800.
Yeah.
Those bought a few. And it's funny, like with tournament fishing, I tell guys all the time, it's amazing. Like one of my buddies who does really well in the Dakotas has taken a lot of stuff that I've shown him here and literally
Sure.
take the exact stuff and put it out there, and nobody's doing it because that's not what you do, and vice
Right.
versa, right?
Right.
Slow
Right.
depth works on Lake Erie, just
Right.
because people don't do it or don't go to the speeds to do it, it doesn't not work.
Right.
And when you find those little niche windows when that works, that can be the difference maker, right? I mean,
Yep. Yep.
Lake of the Woods with a reef runner. Most people up there, when they're using bobbers and tiny things, would think, "Oh, that's way too big." And
Right.
I can remember talk about another blast from the past, Steve Bissett. You remember him?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I used to fish with Dave Hansen, who they were travel and best
Sure.
friends, and
Yeah.
they started doing that up on Mille Lacs with burning those big reef runners,
Sure.
and just opened up a whole new thing after having done it on Erie and
Yeah.
other bodies of water, Saginaw and stuff. That guys were doing it, but
Yeah. Yeah. So Lake of the Woods is the one place I won't give up, and 80% of the fishing we do up there now is muskie fishing. So I
really
love the muskie fish. More
interesting.
like hunting.
Yeah, that is a whole different muskies. You're a whole different breed to do that, right?
Right.
But so speaking of some of that stuff we were talking about with the reef runners and things, in your time tournament fishing in those early years, I think that there was way more experimentation because the palette wasn't as full, right? Like now everybody just has all these tools in the arsenal, and it's just what is a fireball jig is accepted. I mean, but when those things were being developed, where were you, either whether you directly helped, you know, cultivate that, if you want to say, or maybe you just were around from that? Do you have any kind of, give us some behind the scenes? People love this behind the scenes, or at least I do. It's kind of like the business end of things of, how some of those individual things, if specific lures or whatever were developed.
Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time. So when I joined on with Ranger Boats, I spent a number of days each year going down to the factory and really being inside the boat with the designers and the engineers that are out on the floor, kind of making adjustments to the molds and things. So I would say that that was one area that I really enjoyed a lot. And it was simple things, not everybody that worked at Ranger Boats was, into boats and fishing. Most of them were, but there would be simple things like you don't want to have sharp edges on, like the gunnel of your boat. You want to have rounded edges because you're, kneeling down or you're leaning up against it. And it's like some of those concepts were just foreign. Like how we fish up north is different than how they fish down south. And so we made lots of little tweaks over the years, lots of ideas that were thrown at them that they didn't process for 4, 5, 6 years, but eventually they did get incorporated, like cup holders. They're like, why do we need a cup holder in a boat? And I'm like, because people drink soda and water and beer.
Well, and it's funny you say that because again, I'm in the next generation of that, and I'm still doing the same thing, and I'm down there with Sharpies and cardboard and all that. And if you
Yeah.
anybody you're listening to this that has a pro model Ranger now, I
Hmm.
am 100% the responsibility for the bucket holder under the port console because I'm like
Okay.
I have to have a place to put my bucket that we use for many things. Don't make me be graphic, but then also
Yeah.
as a drift bag or a bailing bucket. And I'm like, I have to have that. And they literally, it was like, it's a laughing, it's still a joke amongst many of the internal people there of how much that costs to make that little tooling
That's
to have.
awesome.
So Ross can have a bucket holder, but it's like you said, it's those little things. And Ranger's been building boats, and they obviously almost everybody there knows more about it than anybody. The current plant manager is a guy that's been there for his entire life,
Right.
Jimmy there. But any rate, some they're not as into the northern market, right? They're in
Right.
Arkansas. Bass boats is their deal, and so a lot of that stuff
Yep.
that I was able to help them with, just like you were
Yep.
decades before. And you just think about your first Ranger versus now.
Right.
I mean, crazy difference, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I can remember we fished a tournament out of Mobridge, South Dakota. This would have been late 90s, probably 97, 98. And we ran, it was early in the season. It was May, like early May. And most of those fish had spawned out and they were in the bait up north was just plentiful. And we found out that the fish down south, for whatever reason, had not spawned out yet down by Cow Creek. And so there were 8 or 9 of us that the day before the tournament, we decided we're going to run from Mobridge to Pier. And it was a 130-mile run by boat.
Is that the one Roach like fell on the dock?
I don't know.
Like
I
he just like when did the wind pick up bad on the return one day?
Yes, day two. It got, yeah, 3, 4 footers, and it was tight getting back. But all 8 or 9 people that made the run south, we all finished in the top 10, and it was kind of one of those deals where it was just like, and that's back when you could have like open gas containers in the back of your boat. The good old days, the Wild West.
Yeah, well, you needed it back then because I think about when you were on Put in Bay there, you got a 75 horse or whatever you said it was with a 17
Yeah.
footer. I couldn't even where I went today with because it was a little bit rough on the way back. Probably would have ran out of gas.
Well, I got to tell you, I am excited to come over and visit you on Erie. I got a new Ranger last year, and it's the new 622
Oh yeah,
with the 400.
oh yeah.
I cannot believe they're putting those engines on those boats. It's just pretty
That
crazy.
V that V10, I mean, it's an amazing thing, but it to put it in perspective, you guys that don't know what we're talking about, you better not have a suburb type garage for your boat because that motor is so much taller than even the L6 Verado that it's probably not going in. The guy that actually bought my boat last year, my personal boat, he had to go literally move a header. Like Like that's dedication right there.
They didn't think about that when they built that boat to put
I
that
don't
motor on.
well, and in fairness, again, I think that that's the thing about the marine industry, right? And probably drives you nuts about fishing, you know, because you're like I said, you're like me, which you like the business end of things. That motor is many people that have Ranger 600 series, which it's a lot around your neck of
Right?
the woods and mine. In the big picture, people don't understand if you don't travel. Like I think a lot of times I try to think sometimes before I speak, even though everybody may laugh at that, because I've done a lot of saltwater fishing in the last maybe 10 years or so. And when
Nice.
you go down and you think that we have a lot of motors and people need to listen to us about our walleye boats, and then you go down and realize down in Florida, there are way more boats than we have, and they put 3 and 4 on each one.
And 5 and 6.
Yeah. And so those center consoles, which primarily is what that was designed for, some of those big, you know, catamaran styles or Freemans and such. Those guys they're not putting them in a garage in the subdivision.
Nope. Nope.
Is there any other lures or anything that you were involved with, or you think that just, you know, that really stands out as something that was like, man, I was right at the cusp of that, whether it was seeing it or developing it directly?
Well, we had some insight into back when they were putting the tail dancer together at Rapala. We toyed around with those for a while. I know that various rod holders over the years, the fish on rod holders, were made suggestions to those. At one point, we'd spent about $20,000 to actually put together our own planer board, and it was pretty unique. We're going to have it kind of a different lime green color just to make it a little bit more unique, and then just kind of towards the tail end of it, we're like, there's really kind of two dominant players, and they're both pretty good products, and so we just kind of moved away from it. So there were a lot of good designs that never hit the retail stores, and a lot of it was probably a good thing. Uh, there's certainly a number of consumers that would have been able to use the products, but after a while, you kind of learn that there's a certain recipe for being able to ultimately, a retailer has to make money to sell the product, and a distributor has to make money to sell the product, and a manufacturer has to make money. And so there's, this kind of stair step process where if it costs me $10 to make it, I got to, let's say sell it for 20, and then they got to be able to sell it for 30, and then eventually sell it for 40 to the consumer. So whatever it costs me to make it, it ends up being 4x to the consumer. And you could just run the math on that pretty simply and say, well, I'm not going to sell a rod sock for $19.
Well, and I think that's a really good point because I have guide clients that fish with me that, you know, it's just like anything else. They're like family after 20 some years, but I
Right,
know that I can put stuff in the boat because I get people that if you were to say, hey, don't photo this please, because this is coming out next year or whatever, when
right.
it mattered probably more than it does now. Um, they're the first person to take a picture and just like send it to people just to send it to people, right?
Yeah,
And the people that are in my little clique there of clients that, you know, they're look at something, they're like, there's no writing on this. This is a there's masking tape and it says one of two, you know. And it's amazing that again, people that are like you that just aren't in the fishing business, that just appreciate business, they're always asking me, they're just like, so what's going on here? And they're always amazed at how many products that I have that never make it because they don't pass the test. Maybe it's a margin thing, maybe because what they have to change to make it usable. And
right.
testing products, I know that I'm going to get some hate here because I do it for trolling mode. I do it for a lot of things without getting myself into trouble here. And people are like, oh my God, you've got 10 rods or 4 trolling motors. It sucks. Prototype testing stuff is horrible because inevitably you're going to have a failure. I mean, you're going to, and then you don't have it. So it's almost like breaking down on the road, knowing you're going to break down on the road, right?
Yeah,
And but that's a big part of like what I personally still do. And I'm sure back then, you know, you guys were doing a lot of, because learning the limitations and the margins and things like that. I don't even know what do you think the percentage is? You mean you mentioned it with like the drift control stuff a little bit of, you know, 10 prototypes to one to market, or?
It's probably different for every company. I stay in touch with, Bart at Rapala a little bit, and I know that, they're designing things all the time. And then it's, again, like you said, one of those key elements, just you can't make it work. And so they got to just hit the pause button. And, I would say one thing that I think has changed in anything that uses a motor is that they've been able to do these battery deals, where they're putting a battery in whatever it is, a blower, a lawnmower, a fillet knife. And that's been a game changer, for some companies. Rapala being, their fillet knife that's got the battery in it now. And tell you what, those things are, just awesome. I mean, the power that they've got as long as they go. So, you're up north and you don't have a plug-in. Of course, you can use the good old-fashioned knife, but if you're catching, big fish like you normally do, you're going to need something that's, got a little bit more beef behind it, so you can cut those big slabs up.
Well, I try to be a conservation minded and let those fish go if possible, but I'm not into all this. Some of these guys filleting 8-9 pounders. I'm trying to keep away from that. That's not such a good look, but
The
you're right.
18 inchers are still the best eating.
They are
18 to 20, whatever. Out in Erie, those are probably 24 inchers.
We're pretty blessed here. We have a good situation, but I try to do my part to make sure it continues to be that. Because like you said, we have highs and lows. We were in a high water datum, which there's a correlation between having really good spawns. Yep. And now we're in a low water datum, which there's a correlation for not having good spawns, which is what we're kind of already seeing. And so I think, again, my little soapbox moment here, kind of sidebar, but is I try to, as part of my job is to educate a little bit or to let these people know. I tell my little analogy is I'm like, there are guys that have won, you can Google this, that have won the lottery that never made more than X a year, just a normal regular wage at best.
Right.
And they win $10 million and they're broke a year or two later. A good thing can be taken away. And I think we need to, as sportsmen, again, forward facing. I know you kind of hinted at that a little bit when we jerked you away from getting too crazy into that the weeds there. But, guys that are catching fish that never were before, catching them 50, 60 feet deep. A lot of my buddies, they won't even fish that deep because they don't want to
sure.
They want to catch and release fish. And that's just, you may let them go, but just because they swim away, don't mean they're going bad deal.
Right.
The Linders actually just did a study on that with crappies over the winter. That was
really
mind blowing. Yeah, it was. Mind blowing. And the mortality rate was those fish that were over 25, 30 feet. It's almost guaranteed death. And that was in the winter with cold water. So
wow.
Yeah,
that education is important. I mean, getting that out to people, because there's a lot of people think that they're doing the right thing, and at the end of the day, they don't know that the fish are dying.
And I think some people just choose to not think about it, and they just, we got a lot of fish, And again, when everybody has that attitude, that doesn't always end well in the big picture.
Yep.
But so, what can Sam Anderson? Because this has flown by. We've caught up on a personal level, on a professional level. We've gone through the purchase and sale of a couple companies. What is something you want to leave us with that you've learned through your fishing deal? I'm putting you on the spot heavily here, and most people fail, but I feel like you are such a polished machine that you're going to bring it.
I would say so I think one learning, you asked a question earlier in the segment about what are some of the low points, and I would say probably one of the lowest points. This would have been the first year I qualified for the PWT Championship. It was on Lake of the Woods. And we were on some great fish, went out, leading the tournament, going into the final day by a pretty large margin. Here I am, a 20-year-old kid, and I had a guy who worked for a company that I won't name come up to me and say, we had been talks about sponsorships, and he's like, hey, we really want to get you, using our fishing line. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, here, put some of this on for tomorrow. I'm like, oh, okay. And I made the mistake of putting some of that line on. And the next day, literally, I had not lost a fish. I had not broke off a fish in 5 days of practice and 2 days of a tournament, and I busted off 6 fish, 3 of which were over 10 pounds, and
Oh,
I was just beside myself. Um, and I ended up not winning the tournament, and it was obviously a big mistake. It was a rookie mistake. And I think you always have to look for um, the opportunity and the learning in those moments. And of course, the first week or two after that tournament, I had a hard time, you know, digesting it and looking at it. But months and years later, and now I look back and I say, that was an opportunity to learn and grow, and still, again, love Lake of the Woods, and use that learning opportunity many years later in other things, not necessarily just fishing, but you got to have a plan. You got to have a routine, stick to your routine, and don't let some of those distractions get you off of your routine and your plan.
dude, that's a hard lesson right there. I mean, I know you're a much cooler cat than me. Like, I'm way more hyper than you. That the Anderson bloodline is much more tame. At least the ones that I've met, they're much cooler. But oh man, that's a hard lesson. That timing, that's bad
Yeah,
timing.
yeah, that was tough.
Oof.
Uh,
Well, I got to be honest, you brought it, because a lot of people choke. So that just shows how cool, calm, and collected you are. Because and then you brought up, and most people don't want to talk about. They want to talk about a win, right?
sure,
So, but you do truly learn the most from a loss, I guess.
you bet, you bet.
Well, I can't thank you enough for giving us your time here, and
Hey,
I've
thanks for
known you.
connecting. Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
Yeah, I know trying to get us both together was difficult. We finally made it happen, and
Yes, we'll do it. Let's get together and get out fishing.
I feel like the next step in this deal is we're going to go fishing on Erie, and we're going to do a podcast, and then we're probably going to have it about like some type of competition, because as cool and calm as you are here, people, and you're listening to this, Sam is a lethal magician on the water, and he's going to try to prove that he still has it to me. And I feel like we're going to have something go down.
Oh, would love it.
So, well, thanks again for tuning in. Sam, thanks for your time. The Bigwater Podcast, it's everywhere. If you can't find it, you probably suck at catching walleyes, because we are on all the download sites, and YouTube if you want to see Sam's little bit higher hairline than when I first met him, and a much redder beard on my end for sure. But check us out at bigwaterfishing.com across all of the social media platforms. Until the next episode, we're out.